Have you ever woken up one morning and felt like something inside you quietly shifted? Not with fear, but with a strange calm, as if the life you've been living no longer fits. Maybe you can't explain it, but somewhere deep within, you sense that the way you've been moving through the world is no longer true to who you are becoming. That shift often begins at 40, not because life is ending, but because something sacred is beginning, something more honest, more real. The outer noise starts to fade, and in its place, a quieter voice emerges. It's the voice that's been with you all along, waiting for you to finally slow down and listen. At 40, you start to feel it. The subtle pull inward, the desire to let go of pressure, of pretending, of proving. You begin to wonder what would happen if you stopped running, stopped forcing, and simply allowed. This isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. You are not falling apart. You're waking up. And the life that's waiting for you on the other side of that awakening is the life you were meant to live all along. Learning to let go and finding peace. Letting go isn't something most of us are taught. In fact, we're taught the opposite: to keep it together, to push through, to hold on to what's familiar, even if it hurts. Especially in your 30s, there's this unspoken pressure to have everything figured out: your career, your family, your future. So we cling to jobs that drain us, to relationships that no longer grow us, to versions of ourselves we don't even like, because letting go feels like failure. But somewhere around 40, a quiet truth begins to surface. Maybe peace isn't found in holding it all together. Maybe it's in the release. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means finally releasing the weight that was never yours to carry. It means saying goodbye to the expectations that shaped your identity, to the outdated roles you've outgrown, to the stories you've been telling yourself about who you need to be in order to be loved, respected, or safe. Yes, it feels scary, because what we cling to gives us a sense of self, even when it hurts. But when you begin to loosen your grip, you don't lose yourself. You begin to return to yourself. Peace isn't something we achieve by doing more. It's something we remember by letting go. And letting go isn't a one-time event. It's a practice. It's a quiet trust that you'll be okay without the mask, that life won't fall apart if you stop performing, that there's a deeper strength inside you, waiting for space to rise. And maybe, for the first time in years, you feel it. Not the chaos, not the striving, but the stillness underneath. The beginning of real peace. The kind that lives within you, no matter what's falling away. Letting go of the clock, trusting the right moment. We spend so much of our lives racing the clock. There's always a deadline, a milestone, a timeline we're supposed to meet. Graduate by this age, settle down by that one, buy the house, build the career, start the family, all before the invisible clock strikes too late. But somewhere along the way, often around 40, that pressure begins to unravel. You start to ask, whose clock am I running on? And why? Do I feel like I'm already behind? That's when you begin to realize something quietly radical. Time is not your enemy. The clock you've been chasing isn't real. It's a story built by culture, comparison, and fear. And it has kept you running from yourself. Letting go of the clock doesn't mean becoming passive or unmotivated. It means you stop measuring your life by arbitrary timelines and start tuning into a deeper rhythm, your rhythm. You begin to notice that life doesn't operate on schedules, but on seasons. Some seasons are for growth, some are for rest. Some are for blooming, others for rooting. And none of them are wrong. You start to see that rushing leads to resistance, that the need to hurry often comes from fear of missing out, of being left behind, of not being enough. But when you pause, when you listen, you discover that everything unfolds exactly when it's meant to. Not a moment sooner, not a moment late. There's great peace in trusting the timing of your life. It allows you to stop pushing and start flowing, to stop clenching and start breathing. You begin to live more from your center than from your schedule. And in doing so, you realize that the present moment, the one you used to race through, is actually the doorway to everything you've been chasing. Finding your purpose through what you've lived. Purpose isn't something you find out there, waiting like a prize at the end of a perfectly planned path. It's not something someone can hand you. It's something that slowly rises from within, usually after life has humbled you enough to start listening. For a long time, you may have searched for meaning in titles, achievements, or praise. You tried different paths, followed advice, chased success, and yet something always felt missing. That quiet ache, that sense that you were meant for something more, not something bigger, but something truer. But here's what no one tells you. Your purpose isn't separate from your pain. It lives in the very places you tried to hide, in the heartbreaks you survived, in the silence you endured, in the skills you learned just to cope. Every step, every scar, every closed door has been shaping you, not in vain, but with intention. At 40, a strange clarity begins to emerge. You start to see how the mess of your life was never a detour. It was the curriculum. The path you thought was broken was, in fact, the only way through. And the more you stop asking, "What should I be doing?" and start asking, "What has life been preparing me for?" the more the pieces begin to come together. Purpose isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just doing the next honest thing. Sometimes it's showing up fully for the life that's here, not the one you imagined, but the one that's real. And when you begin to honor the life you've lived, with all its losses and lessons, you'll find that purpose has been walking beside you all along, not ahead of you, not behind you, but right here, waiting for you to notice. You don't need to prove anything anymore. There comes a moment, often in the quiet aftermath of enough striving, when you realize you're tired, not just physically, but soul deep tired. Tired of proving, tired of performing, tired of editing yourself to fit someone else's idea of acceptable. And you start to ask, what if I just stopped? So much of life is spent trying to be seen. We dress it up as ambition, as excellence, as responsibility. But underneath, there's often a quiet plea. Please notice me. Please validate me. Please tell me I'm enough. We build entire lives around that whisper. We shape our personalities, our careers, even our relationships to earn applause that never really satisfies. But the older you get, the more hollow that applause begins to sound. The more you realize that approval is a moving target, and chasing it only moves you further from yourself. At some point, you begin to crave something different, not to be impressive, but to be real. Not to win, but to be whole. Not to please, but to be at peace. You realize that being misunderstood is survivable. That being seen clearly by everyone isn't necessary, or even possible. And in that realization, there's freedom. Because when you no longer need to prove anything, you return to the simple truth of who you are. You get to show up unmasked. You get to love without agenda. You get to live without the weight of explanation. This is not giving up. This is letting go of the illusion that your worth is something you earn. And in that letting go, you don't become smaller. You become vast. Because you're no longer confined to the box others put you in. You expand into the truth of your being, messy, beautiful, honest, free. You're waking up from the inside out. Waking up doesn't always feel like light pouring through the window. Sometimes it feels like darkness cracking open. It's not always peaceful. Sometimes it's unsettling, because you're starting to see clearly what you once ignored, avoided, or denied. The stories you told yourself, the roles you played, the distractions you chased, one by one, they begin to fall away. You start noticing things, not out there, but in here. You notice how your body tightens when you're not speaking your truth, how exhaustion sets in when you're living out of alignment, how silence feels more nourishing than noise, how peace feels more familiar than performance. This is what waking up looks like. Not sudden, not dramatic, but slow and internal. Like a dimmer switch turning up the light one notch at a time. It's not that the world changes. It's that you begin to see the world without the filters you've worn for so long. And in that seeing, you begin to feel more clarity, more compassion, more groundedness. You start responding instead of reacting, pausing instead of panicking. You no longer need to run from discomfort or chase happiness. You begin to sit with what is, and in that sitting, you discover something radical: presence. The awakening that matters isn't flashy. It's honest. It doesn't need to be explained, only embodied. It's the way your breath deepens, the way you speak more gently, the way you stop rushing your own healing, the way you meet the moment as it is, even when it's messy. Waking up from the inside out means you're no longer trying to escape your life. You're beginning to live it, fully, presently, and awake. Protecting your energy, living with intention. As you wake up to your inner life, you begin to notice the things that drain you, conversations that leave you empty, environments that feel loud even in silence, people who take but rarely give, the version of yourself that says yes when you mean no. You start to feel, not just think, that your energy is sacred, and you begin to protect it like it matters. Because it does. This isn't about building walls. It's about honoring the truth of what supports your peace and what doesn't. You no longer spend your time where you're tolerated, but where you're nourished. You stop explaining your boundaries to those committed to misunderstanding them. You understand now that your time, your attention, your inner world, they are your most precious resources. Living with intention means you don't go on autopilot anymore. You pause. You choose. You ask, is this aligned? Not in a way that's rigid or fearful, but with a gentle self-respect. You realize that a peaceful life isn't built through achievement, but through awareness. Through tiny, conscious decisions that add up to wholeness. You begin to curate your life the way an artist approaches a canvas, not to impress, but to express. You create space for stillness. You give yourself permission to rest. You tend to your inner garden with kindness. And slowly, your outer world starts to reflect the inner clarity you've cultivated. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's sacred. And living with intention doesn't mean your life is always perfect. It means it's always yours. Aligned, awake, and deeply, unapologetically real. Finally showing up fully in your life. There comes a time when waiting no longer makes sense. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting for permission. Waiting until everything is figured out, perfect, or safe. You realize that life is not a rehearsal. This is it. And if you keep delaying your presence, you end up living around your life instead of in it. Showing up fully doesn't mean you have everything together. It means you're willing to be seen as you are, where you are. It means no longer shrinking to make others comfortable, no longer editing your truth to keep the peace. It's standing in your story, not because it's flawless, but because it's yours. And that, in itself, is enough. At this point in your journey, you've let go of the roles you no longer need, the timelines that no longer serve, the approval that no longer defines you. What's left is something honest, and from that honesty, a quiet courage begins to rise. The courage to speak, to act, to live in alignment with your soul, even when it's inconvenient or misunderstood. You stop outsourcing your worth. You stop looking for signs that you're allowed to exist fully. You give yourself permission, not because someone said you could, but because you finally remember that you always could. And so, you begin to live, not from obligation, but from authenticity. Not from fear, but from freedom. not for applause, but from alignment. You show up in your own skin, in your own rhythm, in your own truth. And in doing so, you become the home you've been searching for all along. A new you, rooted in peace. You may not look all that different on the outside, but inside, something has shifted in a way that can't be undone. You're no longer chasing, not after time, approval, or perfection. You're no longer running, not from your past, your truth, or your own reflection. What once felt urgent now feels optional. What once felt like survival now feels like noise. There is a quiet in you now, not the absence of thought, but the absence of struggle. You still feel deeply. You still care. But your peace no longer depends on things going your way. It comes from within, from roots that have grown deep through seasons of letting go, of listening, of learning to sit with what is. You're not trying to be anyone. You are simply being, and that is more than enough. There is no performance, no mask, no striving. Just presence, just breath, just life meeting itself through you, gently, honestly here. You no longer live from a script someone handed you. You live from awareness. You respond instead of react. You move with intention, speak with clarity, and love without fear of loss. You've stopped trying to control the river. Instead, you've learned to float, not out of laziness, but out of deep trust in the current of your own becoming. This is not about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about becoming more you than you've ever allowed yourself to be. And from that place, everything shifts, not because the world changes, but because you're now seeing it from a heart that is no longer at war with itself. Peace is no longer something you visit. It is where you live. And if this journey spoke to something deep inside you, a quiet knowing, a gentle pull, you're not alone. There's more waiting for you here, more moments of stillness, more paths toward truth, more reminders that you are already enough. If this felt like coming home, consider staying. Subscribe to keep walking this path with us. Like or share if you feel someone else needs this too. And when you're ready, the next step on your journey is just one video away. We're here, in presence, in peace, whenever you need to return.